squares. This is something you guys asked for. I did this a while back. I didn't actually show you the PDF, but I think I did this back in 2017, 2018. This is from Judgy Bitch, talked about the fact that white mothers raise black boys to the point where they're almost insignificant between other white boys, right? So in other words, black boys raised by white mothers are almost the same as the white boys raised by white mothers. In other words, the maternal influence is probably the most important, according to this study, than anything else. So what it's saying is that the black boys raised by white mothers, or I won't say superior, but the thing is their outcomes are better. So whether that means that white women raise black boys so they can actually fit in better into the white dominant society, that could be a factor. But the thing is, the results are that in this society, white women raise black boys better than black women. So I'm gonna do a couple studies. So this is one. This is the one that you guys asked for. On the racial divide in education and the labor market, evidence from interracial families. And we're not gonna read the whole thing because this thing's like 30 pages long. So we examined the gaps between minorities and whites in education and labor market outcomes, controlling for many covariates, including maternal race. Identification from reported races within the family. Estimates show two distinct patterns. First, there is no significant difference in outcomes between white and black males with white mothers. Second, large differences persist between groups and black males with black mothers. That is the point. That's the point that Judgy Bitch was saying. This is from the abstract. So we're going to skip down. Got a little jello effect. But while there is a role for all factors, maternal race is the single largest factor for boys, more important than the combined effects of all other characteristics of the mother, characteristics of the father, and school quality as measured by school fixed effects. In other words, the most important, out of all the other factors, right, the most important factor is the mother. The maternal race of the mother is more important than all the other factors. We show that while white children come from families with significantly higher incomes, are more likely to come from two-parent families, and are more likely to attend high-quality schools than either black or Hispanic children with white mothers. Controlling for these observables can account for virtually all the differences in outcomes between interracial children with white mothers and white children. The fact that maternal race better explains outcome gaps for boys than for girls is also consistent with Bertrand and Pan. And we're going to do another study that shows why, who show that non-cognitive returns to parental inputs differ markedly by gender. In other words, girls do much better than the boys do, and the boys are more sensitive to who their mother is. That's what they're trying to say. Skipping down. The study most related to ours deals directly with this issue. Examine children of mixed race families, both parents of black mothers and white fathers, as well as white mothers and black fathers. They show no cognitive differences at 8 months. If anything, children of black mothers are at an advantage at this age. Interesting. However, children of white mothers have significantly higher IQs at age 4 compared to children of black mothers, suggesting that the environment of children of white mothers was more conducive to cognitive development. This is a study about black GIs in black and white GIs in Germany, and while they out of wedlock births of black and white soldiers while there was considerable prejudice against blacks in Germany at the time when I first gave these children a German version of the Weissler IQ test, children with black fathers had almost identical scores to children with white fathers. So it's all dependent on the mothers, we're saying. We argue that the mothers are most often the parent primarily responsible for child rearing, and show empirically that white mothers raising black children are remarkably similar to black mothers on a number of key traits. We compare the outcomes of black children raised by white mothers to two groups: white children raised by white mothers and black children raised by black mothers. This is the test. We're going to skip down. We're not going to hold you too long. I'm going to put the link to the study in the description. You can look for yourself. Here's an interesting one, though. White women who intermarry have higher BMI, basal metabolic intake. In other words, they eat more. They're bigger women and lower education than other white women, while black men who intermarry are thinner and have lower wages. That's interesting. I might have to look that one up. Check that out for future research, because that's fascinating. Turning to differences by mother's race, white students and black students with white mothers have significantly higher test scores, math grades, and overall GPAs, and for male students are more likely to have finished colleges and have higher wages. For all these measures, there is no significant difference between white students and black students with white mothers. Skipping down, it's a bunch of results. For math grades and wages, similar to patterns emerge for black males, namely large initial gaps between black and white students that disappear once we account for background and characteristics, particularly the mother's race. Children of black mothers have math grades that are almost half a point lower than children of white mothers, with the gap falling to 0.04 once we add school fixed effects. For wages, children of black mothers earn 20% less lower wages than children of white mothers, regardless of whether characteristics of the father or school are fixed or included. First column for the boys in Table A shows absent school fixed effects. Maternal race accounts for over 71% and 55% of the Hispanic picture vocabulary test scores. That would make sense. Characteristics of the father are less important and actually insignificant for blacks once school fixed effects are included. The race of the mother is even more of an important factor in accounting for gaps in math grades and log wages for black males, explaining over 77% of the raw gap, regardless of whether school fixed effects are included. Skipping down, I think there's one more section for this one. Conclusion: across a number of academic and early labor market outcomes, observables can fully account for the differences in outcomes between black children and white mothers and white children and white mothers. Based on observables, white mothers with white children are negatively selected relative to white mothers with white children, suggesting that own race is not important for academic and labor market outcomes. Significant outcomes gaps remain, however, between blacks with white mothers and blacks with black mothers. Using the decomposition in Gelbith 2009, we assigned almost half of the test score gap to unobserved factors correlated with the mother's race for each race-gender combination analyzed. Our findings support the contention made by Heckman in 2011 and others that the family environment is of primary importance in generating skills gap observed later in life. While schools certainly play a role, we estimate that the difference across schools only account for 20 to 30% of the test score gaps. We also conclude that discrimination based on skin color is no longer the first order concern. We argue that instead, the disparate outcomes must be operating through characteristics related to maternal race. The clear next step is to further isolate why it is that the race of the mother correlates so strongly with the education and labor market outcomes. And that is from, I'm going to put the link in the description. This is from 2015. So relatively, it's not that old. But we have one more that we're going to do. All right, we're back. And this is the second half. A mother's academic gender stereotypes and education-related beliefs about sons and daughters in African American families. I think I have a date on this one. Do not have a date on this one. Consistent with the hypothesis, mothers held less favorable expectations for sons and perceive sons to be less academically competent than daughters. In addition, mothers reported stereotypes favoring girls over boys in academic domains. Stereotype endorsement, in turn, was related to the mother's educational expectation for beliefs about academic competence of their own children, even with the use actual academic achievement controlled. Negative stereotypes about the academic abilities of African American boys may create a negative feedback loop, thereby contributing to the maintenance of the gender gap in African American educational outcomes. And this has been going on. This has been going on since the 40s. That's been documented. Moynihan said the exact same thing. The gender gap in African American educational attainment is even more striking amongst post-secondary degree holders. In 2005, African American women earned twice as many bachelor's degrees as African American men. Remember in 2008, they were talking about that, and they said that black women are the most educated. Although millions of African American boys excelled academically, the gender gap in African Americans' educational attainment is larger than observed for other racial ethnic groups. I actually played a short from that. The gender gap in African American ADOS people is larger than any other group. That's what this says. That's what Richard Reeves said. He said the exact same thing. All measuring, talking about education, jobs, everything. The gender gap is bigger in African Americans than it is for any other group between male and female. It is highly likely that boys' lower level of academic motivation play a role in the gender gap in African American attainment. However, it is important to recognize that boys' attitudes are shaped by forces in their social environments that are often beyond their control. Failure to acknowledge the role of these ecological forces may result in a blame the victim approach to understanding the academic difficulties of African American boys. In other words, the liberals, the women, and especially black women blame African American boys and men for their own failures, right? This is the blame the victim. But when we talk about matriarchy, we talk about matriarchy, where the blame the victim term actually came from. We talk about matriarchy. All of a sudden, oh no, it ain't our fault. It's racism. It's sexism. It's patriarchy. You can't blame the failure on the black family, on black women. That's blame the victim. But they do it to us. They do it to black men all day and every day. In fact, they waive their jobs and they waive their success and their education in black men's faces. You can't go to any social media, even mainstream media, and not see that meme that black men can't keep up and black women are actually running laps around their men, but nobody says why. When you get down to why, all of a sudden black women get upset. Parents' general beliefs about the relative academic competence of boys and girls are one factor that may shape perceptions of their own sons and daughters. Beliefs that depict African American boys as less competent academically than African American girls can be characterized as the academic gender stereotypes. It is well documented that stereotypes about social groups operate through both conscious and explicit subconscious implicit mechanisms to influence expectations, perceptions, and behavior toward others. Skipping down. In reality, African American boys experience more academic difficulties and fewer academic successes than their female counterparts. Notable gender disparities favoring African American girls and women have been documented with respect to school achievement, referrals to programs for mentally retarded or learning disabled, participation in honors and advanced courses during high school completion rates, and enrollment and graduation from institutions of higher learning. In other words, it's on record that African American girls have been far superior in education than African American boys. It's forever. People say, where does that come from? This is another long one. We're going to skip down and we're going to shorten this up and we're going to get out of here. A majority of 67% of the mothers in our sample endorse the stereotype that boys are less competent than girls in academic domains. More importantly, the relative strength of stereotype endorsement was relative to both mothers' expectation for the eventual educational outcome of their children as well as their perceptions of their children's academic competence. Compared with other, look at this shit, man. Compared with other mothers who strongly endorse the stereotype that girls are more competent than boys in academic domains view daughters as more capable than sons, and sons are as less capable. These associations were statistically significant even when youth's actual achievement was controlled, suggesting that social stereotypes about African American boys led to a biased perception on the part of mothers. Hot damn. The vulnerability of African American boys in academic settings is well documented, with gender differences in educational attainment highly pronounced at the upper educational levels. In spite of negative societal stereotypes about academic abilities of African American students in general, boys in particular, millions of African American boys do well in school. In spite of, right? Shout out to Dr. J. But the thing is, when you put these two things together, guess what? Guess what? You know where the problem is. So basically, black women raised the men that they complain about. They purposely raise the men that they complain about. They perpetuate this, what Clark called the Tangler pathology. This is the Tangler pathology. I don't care how many studies you have, how well documented the problem is, right? You wonder why the black community does nothing to improve it. What was the study last year? Amongst 8th grade boys, only 10% of black boys can read a reading level. Chetty and Reeves did that study about black boys. But everybody has been knowing it since Moynihan, since Clark, but nobody does anything about it. Especially your women. Why? It's because this is a gynocracy, and women are perfectly happy to actually perpetuate this because they are on top. They want to stay in charge. That's why nothing ever happens. That's why the PhDs that I've talked to all say the biggest barrier to black boys' education is not really the school system. It's the mamas. It's the mothers. It's the females. For a host of reasons. And these are just a few. It's not like this is new. Clark said it in the 50s and the 60s, said the same thing. Moynihan tried to say that in the Negro family. They tried to say that in the Kerner Commission. Kwanzaa Kunjufu said the same thing in the 80s, 40 years ago. Nothing's done because they don't want to do anything. Black women are perfectly happy for this outcome. Black women like compromised males. I see it in my own family, mainly the women, and guess who follows behind the women? The men. And what do they say? What do the other studies say? The father's role, when you account for the father's role, it's almost insignificant. Fathers don't have that big of a role in the education of their boys. That is why with my oldest grandson, I took control of his education rather than the women did. Because if the women had done it, he wouldn't have gotten this far. I took control of him when he was 3. And there's a difference between him and my other grandchildren. I didn't trust the females. In fact, the females fought me. The ones that are just behind him, with the other 2, the females fought me. And you can tell the gap between my grandson, the oldest grandson, and my other 2 grandsons, just on that. So I'm a witness. I've seen this in my own family. I've seen this with my own son. For me, it's not a myth. For me, this is real. This is a personal thing with me because I've seen this stuff. So you can come at me if you want to. I'm going to tell you bullshit. I'm going to tell you bullshit. Anyhow, this has gone on long enough. You guys wanted it. You guys got it. With that, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one.